Most people are exhausted from living paycheck to paycheck, feeling like a gerbil in a wheel where all the money goes out just as fast as it comes in. This isn't just a math problem. It is a guy in the mirror problem that causes deep stress in marriages and keeps you terrified about the future. The Total Money Makeover offers a proven, step-by-step plan to help you take control of your behavior and finally kick Murphy out of your house for good. By applying gazelle intensity to attack your debt, you will learn how to live like no one else now, so that later you can truly live and give like no one else. Stop being normal because in our culture, normal is broke, and start your journey to financial peace today.
Man, that is just it's a brutal reality check, isn't it?
It really is.
I mean, we were sold this idea from the time we're teenagers that debt is just a tool, like
Yeah.
it's this completely necessary part of adulthood. But today's deep dive, we're really about completely ripping the facade off that normal American lifestyle.
Yeah, totally tearing it down.
Exactly. We're decoding a financial philosophy that explicitly, almost aggressively, rejects these modern cultural norms around money management. And we aren't just going to, skim over the surface of these strategies. We're going to dig right into the behavioral psychology, the hard mathematical truths, the deeply ingrained cultural myths, and the literal practical steps required to completely transform your financial tree.
Right. And for you, the listener, whether you're currently suffocating under a mountain of credit card debt, or maybe you're staring down a massive student loan that honestly feels like a life sentence.
Yeah, or you just feel like you make an objectively good income, but somehow can never seem to get ahead.
Exactly. Wherever you are, this deep dive is designed to challenge everything you've ever been taught. It is going to push your buttons. It's going to directly contradict every single message you hear in bank commercials, and honestly, from your broke friends. So we're going to build this from the ground up, starting with the hardest truth of all. Let's dive right into lesson 1, the guy in the mirror problem. So, okay, let's unpack this a bit. The entire system we're looking at today makes this massive foundational claim right out of the gate. It states that personal finance is 80% behavior and only 20% head knowledge.
Right.
Which, that feels like a complete reversal of how the world treats finance, right? Usually we think it's all about complex math or understanding compound interest formulas, predicting market fluctuations.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is how this philosophy completely dismisses the idea that you're struggling just because you don't understand the math.
Okay.
The system explicitly argues that the math of wealth building, it's not rocket science. It's not some arcane secret guarded by Wall Street bankers. It's just simple addition and subtraction. The problem, as the title of this lesson implies, is the guy in the mirror.
Right, it's us.
Yeah, it's us. Most traditional financial advisors make this critical, fatal mistake. They try to show you the numbers, assuming people are just bad at arithmetic. But, think about it logically. If math were the only issue, nobody would be in debt.
Because we all know how to add and subtract.
Exactly. We all inherently, logically know that spending more money than we bring in is a bad idea.
Right. It's like nobody actually sits down with the calculator, runs the numbers, and concludes that paying 24% interest on a credit card to buy a television is like a mathematically sound way to build long-term wealth.
No, nobody does that.
We all know it's a terrible mathematical decision.
We do. So to bridge that gap between what we know and what we actually do, we have to look at the concept of denial. And there was a brilliant analogy used in the source text here. It's called financial flab.
Oh, I love that one.
Yeah, it compares managing money directly to physical fitness. So imagine looking in the mirror one morning and realizing you've let your body completely dissolve into flab. The first step to getting in shape isn't sitting down and reading a textbook on how to exercise, right?
No, or studying the biomechanics of a push-up.
Exactly. We all know we should eat fewer calories and move our bodies more. The knowledge isn't the barrier. The first step is staring in that mirror, admitting that you have a problem, realizing you need to change your ways, and identifying the psychological obstacles that stop you from doing the work.
Right.
Financial fitness is identical. You have to admit you are financially out of shape. There's a great quote we need to look at here from the author's father, actually, where it's noted that 90% of solving a problem is realizing there is one.
Wow. Yeah, and that denial is so incredibly powerful. And the crazy thing is, it doesn't just exist in our own heads. It's reinforced by society.
Heavily reinforced.
Like, there's this great anecdote in the book about a couple, let's call them Sarah and John. They actually managed to break through their denial. They paid off their consumer debt. They saved up $12,000 in cash. And for the first time in their marriage, They were actually smiling. They were breathing easily.
And how did everyone react?
Right. What was the reaction from the people closest to them? John's own dad relentlessly made fun of their plan because they had to take extra jobs, because they stopped going out to eat, because they refused to live the debt-fueled lifestyle everyone else was living. His dad literally asked if they had joined a cult.
That is wild. But it gets right to the absolute heart of the denial factor. Because once Sarah and John broke through their own internal denial and started actually succeeding, they inadvertently became this walking, talking mirror reflecting the massive denial of everyone around them.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Their success made everyone else look bad.
Exactly. It made the people who were still drowning in debt incredibly uncomfortable. And we have to look at Sarah's past rationalizations to understand this mindset, because they perfectly encapsulate the psychology of the financially flabby.
What she used to think.
Well, she used to think, and I quote the sentiment here, if I'm getting approvals from all these banks, I must be okay. I can afford it if I can afford the monthly payment.
Ugh, the monthly payment trap.
Right. That is the pure, unfiltered language of denial. It's surrendering your critical thinking to an external entity. You're allowing a bank, an institution designed from the ground up, to profit off your financial enslavement, to dictate whether or not you're financially healthy, rather than actually sitting down and calculating your true net worth.
Okay, I hear all of this, but I have to jump in and represent the listener for a second. I really have to push back hard here.
Go for it.
Is it really fair to say it's all on the guy in the mirror? What about the realities of the modern economy?
That's a huge question.
Right. Because we're looking at record high inflation. We're looking at massive wage stagnation where paychecks haven't kept up with the cost of living for decades. We're looking at a housing market that feels completely inaccessible to the average person, and systemic economic issues that just crush the middle class.
Yeah.
So it feels a little harsh, maybe even tone deaf, to just point at the mirror and say, you are the entire problem.
And that is the most common and, frankly, the most understandable pushback this philosophy receives.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the broader picture, the system isn't denying that those massive macroeconomic storms exist.
Okay.
It doesn't pretend inflation is a myth. In fact, there is a deep understanding of economic cycles built into this worldview. It acknowledges that recessions are real, they average about 10 months, while growth periods average 57 months.
So they admit the weather is bad sometimes.
Yes. External storms, corporate greed, systemic hurdles, those are absolute realities. However, the philosophy insists on a brutal microeconomic truth. Your internal behavior is the only thing you actually have agency over.
Oh, I see.
You cannot walk into the Federal Reserve and change interest rates. You can't force your CEO to double your salary tomorrow. You cannot control the global supply chain.
Right, you'd go crazy trying to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can only control your own household spending, your own aggressive savings rate, and your own willingness to take on or reject debt. This plan is built specifically to bypass external excuses and demand radical, uncomfortable self-accountability.
So it's not about what's fair.
No, it's not. The economy has never been fair. It's about taking back your power. You have to manage the character you shave or put makeup on with every single morning if you want to win at money.
Okay, that makes sense when you frame it as a matter of agency. It's about focusing your limited human energy on the exact areas where it can actually move the needle, rather than just shouting at the sky about inflation.
Exactly.
So if we accept that our behavior is the root of the problem, we really have to look at the environment that is shaping that behavior. Why do we act this way? Why do we endlessly rationalize buying things we know we cannot afford?
Because we want to fit in.
Right. It's because we desperately want to blend in. We want to be normal. And that brings us perfectly to lesson 2. Normal is broke.
This is where the framework really starts to actively challenge the societal norms we swim in every day. It paints a very bleak but mathematically accurate picture of the normal American family.
The gerbil wheel.
Yes. They're described as being stuck on a gerbil wheel.
Just
Run, absolute exhaustion, but absolutely no traction and no ground covered. All the money comes in on Friday, and all the money goes right back out to lenders by Monday.
It's just a pass-through account.
Pretty much. This normal life is characterized by deep, underlying constant stress. It's a life where spouses communicate primarily through bitter fights about money, and where everyone feels completely out of control of their own destiny.
Yeah, that feeling of being forever a slave to some banker or to the government and to the endless perceived needs of your family, that is a heavy, heavy burden to carry for 40 years.
It really is.
And a huge, undeniable part of this trap is the hurdle of keeping up with the Joneses, the desperate evolutionary need for social approval from our peers.
Precisely. And we have to use hard data to shatter the cultural illusion of what wealth actually looks like in America. The framework references Thomas Stanley's groundbreaking research in The Millionaire Next Door.
Oh, that's a classic.
It is. Stanley found that our cultural image of a millionaire, the massive mansion, the brand new leased European luxury car, the high fashion designer clothes, the country club membership.
Right, the movie version of a millionaire.
Exactly. It's mostly a manufactured myth. The actual typical millionaire in America lives in a perfectly average middle-class home. They drive a paid-for, reliable car that is at least 2 or 3 years old, and they buy their blue jeans at Walmart or Target.
Wow.
Yeah, their primary motivation in life is achieving profound financial security, not securing the fleeting approval of their neighbors.
See, and here's where it gets really interesting, because we are comparing that actual quiet millionaire to the people we will call Bob and Sarah or Ken and Marby.
I know a few Ken and Barbies.
Right. This profile is laid out so clearly because we all know these people. Or maybe, honestly, we are these people. Let's look at their situation. They make a great combined income, say $93,000 a year. They live in a beautiful $400,000 home, but they have a $390,000 mortgage because they took out a home equity line of credit just to furnish the inside so it looked perfect for guests.
Of course.
They have 2 completely leased cars sitting in the driveway worth $30,000 each. They have $52,000 in sprawling credit card debt from vacations and clothes and a leftover $25,000 student loan they've been dragging around for a decade.
Oh, man.
So if you do the math, they have a completely negative net worth. They are technically bankrupt. But, and this is the absolute kicker, Bob's mom is incredibly impressed by their lifestyle, and Sarah's brother actually asked them to borrow money because, from the outside looking in, they are obviously doing so well.
This is what is referred to as the dirty little secret of being a financial fake. They look fantastic. They have the perfect hair, the French manicure, the manicured lawn. But behind those heavy oak doors, there is deep, quiet desperation.
Yeah.
There are sleepless nights and a slowly unraveling marriage. This ties perfectly into a behavioral concept borrowed from Jim Collins' profound book, How the Mighty Fall. Collins talks extensively about hubris, which he defines as a toxic pride and arrogance mixed with a completely false notion of invincibility.
Hubris, that's a great word for it.
Yeah, and in the realm of personal finance, hubris looks exactly like Bob and Sarah. It's the act of borrowing massive amounts of money and saving absolutely nothing because you falsely, arrogantly believe your job is infinitely stable, the economy will always go up, and you can always somehow afford the easy monthly payments.
It's exactly like we are curating a financial Instagram feed in real life.
Yes.
We put the perfect filter on our lifestyle. It looks absolutely flawless and enviable to everyone scrolling by or driving past our house. But behind the scenes, the structural foundation of the house is completely crumbling into dust.
That is a perfect modern analogy. And the terrifying part is that our culture actively defends and enforces this crumbling facade. There is a powerful, slightly terrifying analogy used here about monkeys and a fire hose, adapted from the work of John Maxwell, that explains this perfectly.
Okay, I want to hear this.
Oh, I want you to imagine a group of monkeys placed in a room. In the center of the room is a tall pole, and at the very top of the pole is a bunch of bananas. Naturally, a monkey starts to climb the pole. But the moment he does, the experimenters blast him and all the other monkeys with a freezing cold fire hose.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he falls down. After a while, another monkey tries. Bam! The fire hose again. Very quickly, all the monkeys learn a painful lesson. Climbing the pole equals extreme pain.
Makes sense.
Now, the experimenters turn off the water completely. They take one monkey out of the room and introduce a brand new monkey. The new monkey sees the bananas, sees no danger, and immediately starts to climb. What do the other older monkeys do?
They stop him.
They instantly pull him down and beat him up to save him from the imagined impending fire hose. They enforce the rule. Eventually, the experimenters replace the monkeys one by one until none of the monkeys currently in the room have ever actually been sprayed by the fire hose.
Wait, none of them?
None of them. But if a new monkey tries to climb that pole, they will still violently pull him down and attack him. They don't even know why they aren't allowed to climb. They just know that, well, this is the way things are done around here.
Wow. That is chilling. And the point being made is that we are those monkeys when it comes to the American debt system.
Exactly right. We don't even remember why we think we desperately need car payments, why we think we need to revolve credit card debt, or why we think a mortgage should dictate our entire adult lives. We just know it is considered normal. So when a friend or a family member or a listener to this deep dive suddenly decides they are going to get out of debt, they're going to drive a beater, they're going to stop eating at restaurants, what do? We laugh at them. We call them fanatical. We ask if they joined a cult. We pull them down off the pole. Society actively, aggressively discourages people from escaping the system.
So if normal is this absolute facade built entirely on a foundation of debt, what is the ultimate scorecard that this normal world uses to track how good you are at playing this rigged game? It is the FICO score. And that leads us perfectly into Lesson 3, the FICO score myth.
Oh, yeah. This is arguably one of the most controversial and paradigm-shifting stances in this entire financial philosophy. It completely dismantles the pervasive, universally accepted myth that you absolutely need a credit card or high credit score to survive, function, and thrive in modern society.
Right, because from the time we are in high school, we are constantly told you have to build your credit, get a starter card, finance a small couch. It's treated like a fundamental law of physics or a rite of passage into adulthood.
But if we pause and actually break down exactly what a FICO score is composed of, using FICO's own published data, the illusion just falls apart.
Okay, let's break it down.
So the score is calculated like this. 35% is your debt payment history. 30% is your current debt levels.
Okay, wait, so already 65% of the score is just about how much debt you have and if you pay it.
Exactly. Then 15% is the length of time you've been in debt, 10% is new debt you've recently taken on, and 10% is the type of debt you have. Now look at that formula and tell me what is completely missing.
Your actual money.
Yes.
Your income, your savings account, your retirement investments, your actual mathematical net worth, none of it is in there.
Exactly. You could have $10 million sitting in cash in a checking account, own a paid-for mansion, and have a terrible or even non-existent FICO score.
That is wild.
The blunt truth is this. The FICO score is not in any way a measure of winning with money. Mathematically speaking, it is an I love debt score. It solely and exclusively measures how enthusiastically and consistently you interact with banks and lenders.
Wow.
If you stop borrowing money entirely, cut up your cards, and pay off all your debts, your FICO score doesn't eventually become a perfect 850. It disappears. It goes to zero. It becomes indeterminable.
But this is exactly where people immediately panic. The anxiety spikes. They say, I can't live with a zero FICO score. I can't rent a car at the airport. I can't book a hotel room for my family. I can't safely buy things online without a credit card acting as a shield.
And look, those are valid logistical fears, which is why this system addresses those practicalities head on. The reality is that a simple debit card attached to your checking account, as long as it has a Visa or MasterCard logo on it, will do absolutely all of those things.
Really? All of them?
All of them. It will hold a reservation at a hotel. It will allow you to rent a car, though you might have to show a utility bill or then put a hold on some cash.
Yeah. Okay, what about online shopping? People are terrified of hackers.
Right. And the perception that a debit card is inherently riskier for online shopping is a marketing myth perpetrated by credit card companies. If you look at Visa's own zero liability policy, they state in black and white that they extend the exact same fraud protections and benefits to their debit cards as they do to their credit cards.
Wait, really? The exact same?
Yes, including resolving merchant disputes for defective goods or identity theft. As long as you run the transaction as a credit transaction at the terminal, meaning you sign for it instead of using your PIN, your money is protected.
Okay, I will grant you the hotels and the online shopping, but what about the absolute biggest hurdle? Buying a house. Everyone, and I mean everyone, says you need a stellar FICO score to get a mortgage. If I want to buy a home for my family, you are telling me I can do it with a zero credit score.
Yes, though it requires a shift in how you bank. The idea that you must have a FICO score for a mortgage is a myth perpetuated by a lazy, automated lending industry.
Okay, explain that.
While it's true that massive megabanks rely solely on automated FICO computer systems to approve loans in 30 seconds, you can still get a home loan through a traditional process called manual underwriting.
Manual underwriting.
Right. This is how banking used to work before computers. This is where an actual breathing human being at a mortgage company looks at your entire financial picture. They look at your consistent rent history, your perfect record of utility payments, your stable long-term income, and most importantly, your complete lack of competing debt.
Oh, because you don't have any other payments.
Exactly. And they approve you for a mortgage based on your actual ability to pay, even with a zero FICO score. It absolutely takes a little more effort to find a quality, usually local lender or credit union who still maintains a manual underwriting department. But it is 100% possible.
This philosophy gives some truly fascinating historical context to show just how recent this absolute cultural obsession with debt really is. We act like it's been around since the dawn of time.
It really hasn't.
But it mentions that retail giants like Sears and JCPenney were founded by men who absolutely fundamentally hated debt. In 1910, the Sears Roebuck catalog literally stated in print, "Buying on credit is folly."
Yeah.
And Henry Ford, the pioneer of the modern auto industry, thought debt was a lazy man's method of doing business. Ford Motor Company didn't even offer consumer financing for their cars until 1959.
Which raises an incredibly important critical thinking question. Why the massive shift? Why did debt go from being a shameful folly to an American necessity?
Tell all the money, right?
Always. The historical data notes that before Sears went bankrupt in recent years, they actually made more profit on the interest from their store credit cards than they did on the actual sale of Kenmore appliances and Craftsman tools.
That is insane.
The transition from being a retail store that sold goods to being a predatory lender that just happened to have some merchandise out front to lure people in. Retailers and banks woke up and realized that consumer debt is the most massive, reliable profit center in the history of the world.
Because we spend so much more when we use it. The behavioral statistics show that people spend 50 to 100% more when using plastic versus the physical act of handing over cash.
It's the friction.
Right. It's the physical pain in the brain's pain centers of parting with a physical $100 bill. But here's where I have to push back again, because my friends argue this all the time. What about the perks?
The perks.
I hear people constantly saying, "I'm a responsible credit card user. I pay my card off completely every single month, and I get the airline miles, the lounge access, and the 2% cash back. If I use a debit card, aren't I just leaving free money on the table?"
The framework is highly mathematically critical of this exact argument. First, we have to look at the macro data. Research shows that roughly 61% of people do not actually pay off their credit cards every month, despite what they loudly claim at dinner parties.
Right. Everyone thinks they're the exception.
Exactly. The entire system is a psychological trap designed to catch you the 1 month your transmission blows or you lose your job. Second, regarding the precious airline miles, data from CBS News indicates that as much as 92% of airline miles are never actually redeemed.
92%.
Yes.
Yes.
They expire, the terms change, or the blackout dates make them useless. But the most crucial, undeniable point goes right back to the behavioral psychology we just talked about. Using credit activates the reward centers in the human brain entirely differently than cash.
Because it doesn't hurt.
Exactly. Because you do not feel the immediate emotional pain of the purchase. You organically overspend.
Yeah.
You throw the extra item in the cart. You order the more expensive appetizer.
Yeah, I've definitely done that.
We all have. If you are spending 50% more at the grocery store or the mall, simply because you're swiping a piece of plastic and deferring the pain, that massive overspending completely wipes out the measly 1 or 2% you might be getting back in points. You are spending $1 to get a penny back and calling yourself a genius. The philosophy summarizes it with brutal clarity. Broke people use credit cards. Rich people don't.
That is a stark, offensive way to put it, which is exactly why it cuts through the noise. So, if we completely reject debt, if we throw the FICO scorecard out the window and refuse to play the bank's game, how do we actually build wealth? What is the real engine of financial growth if we aren't using credit? That brings us to lesson 4. Your income is your best wealth tool.
This is the absolute foundational principle for wealth building in this entire system. If you take away only one concept, it is this. Your income, the actual money you bring home from your job every single month, is your most powerful, essential wealth-building tool.
Not leverage, not debt.
Nope. When that income is entirely tied up in a web of monthly payments to massive banks, to car dealerships, to student loan servicers, and to credit card companies, you completely lose the ability to build wealth for your own family. You are waking up every day, going to work, and essentially working as an employee to make the lenders rich instead of making yourself secure.
It's basically saying, sit down and imagine for a second how much money you could save or invest in the stock market or give to charity if you had absolutely zero payments in the world except for your basic utilities and food. If that entire paycheck landed in your bank account and just stayed there.
It's a game changer.
But to harness that tool to protect that income, the plan demands that you use a zero-based budget. which means giving every single solitary dollar a specific name before the month even begins.
Right. And it provides literal physical forms to execute this because, again, this isn't just a theoretical philosophy. It's a behavioral process. The primary tool is the monthly cash flow plan.
Okay, how does that work?
This form forces you to enter your total take-home pay at the very top of the page.
Yeah.
Then you intentionally allocate every single dollar into specific categories: charity, savings, housing, utilities, food, clothing, transportation, and so on. The mathematical goal is that when you subtract all your category totals from your take-home pay, you hit exactly zero.
So no leftover money.
None. Every dollar is assigned a job. If you do your budget and have $300 left over at the bottom, you haven't finished budgeting. You need to assign that $300 to a savings goal or an extra debt payment. It demands total control.
I love the quote they use from leadership expert John Maxwell to describe this. A budget is people telling their money where to go instead of wondering where it went.
That sums it up perfectly.
And what's really helpful is that the system includes recommended percentages for these categories to give you a reality check. Like, your total housing cost should be 25 to 35% of your take-home pay. Food should be 5 to 15%. Transportation 10 to 15%. It gives you a mathematical benchmark to see if you are wildly out of bounds and overspending in a certain area of your life.
Exactly. It provides the guardrails. And for people who argue, but my paychecks fluctuate, I'm in sales or I'm a freelancer, I can't budget, there is an irregular income planning form.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, you prioritize your expenses from most critical to least: food, shelter, utilities at the very top. And as the irregular checks come in throughout the month, you literally fund the items down the list in order of absolute importance. It demands radical intentionality, regardless of your employment type.
But we have to address the academic financial world here because they push back on this debt-free income idea incredibly hard. If you talk to a Wall Street broker or a finance professor, they love to talk about OPM, other people's money.
Oh yeah, they love OPM.
They claim debt isn't a trap. It's a tool or a lever that sophisticated, intelligent people use to magnify their investment returns. Why use your own money when you can borrow the bank's money at 5% and invest it at 10%?
The framework vehemently mathematically disagrees with the debt as a tool myth. It analyzes this by explaining a concept called risk denial. The argument is that over a long lifetime of investing, risk will inevitably, eventually destroy the perceived returns of leveraging debt.
Okay, can you illustrate that?
Absolutely. To illustrate this so anyone can understand it, a brilliant comparison is used: a guaranteed debt-free return versus a highly leveraged market return. The challenge is this: if I offer you a solid, guaranteed 12% return on a mutual fund, or I offer you a massive 500% return on a spin of a casino roulette wheel, you wouldn't just look at the numbers and say, well, 500 is bigger than 12, so I choose roulette.
Right. Common sense dictates that the roulette wheel is a terrible, reckless idea, regardless of the potential upside.
Precisely. You would intuitively, instantly discount that 500% because of the massive looming risk of losing absolutely everything on the roulette wheel. In the academic finance world, they actually use a statistical measure of risk called beta. You have to adjust your expected returns mathematically for the amount of risk you are taking to compare apples to apples.
Okay.
But, and this is the fatal flaw, people completely fail to apply this same beta logic to borrowing money to invest in real estate or the market. You simply cannot compare the absolute peace, security, and guaranteed baseline return of a 100% debt-free home with a highly leveraged, heavily mortgaged real estate investment portfolio without mathematically discounting the portfolio for the massive risk you take on by holding all that debt.
And when the economy inevitably crashes, that theoretical risk becomes a devastating reality. There's a famous Warren Buffett quote used here that sums it up perfectly. When the tide goes out, you can tell who was skinny dipping.
It's so true.
And the author adds their own fantastic metaphor about flying turkeys, the idea that even a turkey can fly in a tornado.
Yes, the turkeys in the tornado. We talked earlier about the 57-month average period of economic growth. When the economy is absolutely booming for nearly 5 years straight, wild, highly leveraged real estate schemes, borrowing on margin to buy stocks or taking out loans to buy crypto, all look like brilliant, foolproof strategies.
Because everyone is making money.
Exactly. The wind is blowing so hard upward that the turkeys are flying. People look at their portfolios and think they are absolute financial geniuses. But As the system warns, when that stupid theory is eventually stress-tested by a brutal 10-month recession, their entire financial house of loans and leverage violently collapses. They get foreclosed on.
Ouch.
The true ultimate test of any financial philosophy isn't whether it makes you rich during a historic boom. It is whether it allows you to survive and thrive in both good times and bad times.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? If your income is your best tool, but right now, today, all your income is actively going out the door to Visa, MasterCard, student loans, and your car loan, how do you get the tool back? If you are living paycheck to paycheck, sitting down and telling your money where to go feels impossible because it's already gone before it hits your checking account.
And that painful realization is the exact pivot point of the entire strategy.
Yeah.
To reclaim your income from those lenders, the system insists you cannot just casually pay an extra $20 a month when you happen to feel like it.
No casual approaches.
No. You cannot just trim your budget by skipping a latte. You need a radical, exhausting, almost terrifying level of behavioral focus to break the chains. Which brings us to Lesson 5, Gazelle Intensity.
Lesson 5, Gazelle Intensity. I have to say, if there is one concept from this entire philosophy that has permeated the culture, it is this one. The definition of this intensity is actually drawn from an ancient text, Proverbs 6.1-5 in the Bible, which essentially says, if you have signed surety, meaning if you've gone into debt and promised your future labor to a lender, you need to deliver yourself like a bird from the snare of the fowler and deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter.
It is a profoundly powerful metaphor because it establishes the literal life or death stakes of the situation. We are talking about the psychology of raw survival versus casual passing interest.
Right.
The framework makes it crystal clear. If you are casually, comfortably trying to get out of debt while you're still going on annual beach vacations, still eating out at nice restaurants every Friday, still buying new clothes, and still trying desperately to maintain that normal middle-class lifestyle, you will fail. Total, sold-out, single-minded, focused intensity to the absolute exclusion of almost everything else in your life is required to break the math.
And the very first physical, undeniable action step of this intensity is what is affectionately called a plastectomy. You have to take scissors and cut up all of your credit cards immediately. Not next month, not when you pay off the balances, but right now.
It is the psychological equivalent of burning the ships when you land on a hostile shore. It ensures a permanent force change in your behavior.
Because you literally can't use them anymore.
Right. By physically destroying the cards and closing the accounts, you remove the artificial safety net of debt. When an emergency hits, and as we will discuss, it absolutely will hit, you are forced to solve the problem with cash, with extra work, or by selling something instead of just defaulting to borrowing money. You are forced to physically change how you operate in the world.
There is an incredibly vivid picture painted here of a nature documentary on the Discovery Channel. You have this gazelle just peacefully gazelling around the savannah, eating grass, totally oblivious. Then the wind shifts. It smells a cheetah hiding in the bushes.
The panic sets in.
Exactly. The very second that gazelle becomes aware of the mortal danger it is in, its entire physical demeanor changes. It doesn't casually jog away. It doesn't trot. It uses every single ounce of biological energy, speed, adrenaline, and maneuverability it possesses to escape. It runs for its actual life. That is the exact, uncomfortably high level of panic and intensity you need to apply to your debt.
To illustrate what this looks like in the real world, practically speaking, the concept of dynamiting the logjam is introduced. Imagine a massive river full of heavy timber logs floating down to a sawmill, and they hit a bend in the river and get completely jammed up.
The water stops flowing.
Right. Sometimes you can get in there with a pole and push them loose, but sometimes the jam is so massive and wedged so tight, you literally need to throw a stick of dynamite in there to blow it apart.
So what is financial dynamite?
In your personal finances, dynamiting the logjam means doing extreme, socially unacceptable things to create a massive influx of cash flow. We're talking about people taking on grueling extra jobs delivering pizzas until midnight after working their 9 to 5. Families having massive weekend garage sales where the kids are terrified they're going to put a price tag on them next. Grown men swallowing their pride and selling their prized Harley-Davidson motorcycles, their expensive golf clubs, or their vintage knife collections.
My absolute favorite, craziest example in the whole text is the woman who got so intense, so desperate to find cash to throw at her debt, she literally scooped up and sold 350-pound goldfish for $1 a piece.
That is amazing.
That is next level, borderline insane focus. It's like taking a magnifying glass outside on a bright, sunny day. If you just wave that magnifying glass around in the air, nothing happens. It just distorts the light. It's useless. But if you hold it perfectly, rigidly still, focused on one single tiny spot on a piece of crumpled newspaper, eventually you smell smoke and then you start a raging fire. That is the power of focused intensity.
Exactly. You stop trying to do 6 noble financial things at once. You temporarily stop investing for retirement. You stop saving for a down payment on a house. You completely stop funding the kids' college funds. You take all of that scattered solar energy and you point it at one single solitary target: getting out of consumer debt.
Wow, stop everything else.
Yes. But this raises the critical mechanical question. Once you have that intense burning focus, where exactly do you aim it first? If you have 5 different credit cards, a massive car loan, and a lingering medical bill, how do you organize the attack?
And that perfectly transitions us to lesson 6. The debt snowball focuses on psychology. The debt snowball is the specific, highly structured, step-by-step method prescribed for eliminating your debts. Here is exactly how the mechanics work. You sit down and list all your debts, excluding your house mortgage, which comes much later, from the smallest dollar balance to the largest dollar balance.
Smallest to largest.
You completely ignore the interest rate. You pay the minimum monthly payments on everything on the list just to keep the lenders off your back. And you attack that absolute smallest debt at the top of the list with every single extra dollar, every pizza delivery dollar, every sold goldfish dollar you can find.
And executing this requires utilizing the debt snowball form. You physically write down the debts, the total payoff amount, and the minimum payment. The absolute magic of this system is in the rollover effect.
How does that rollover work?
Once that smallest debt at the top is completely paid off and gone, you take the minimum payment you were required to pay on it, plus all the extra gazelle intensity money you were throwing at it, and you sweep all of that cash down to add to the minimum payment of the next smallest debt on the list.
Oh, I see. So the payment gets bigger.
Yes. Just like a snowball rolling down a snow-covered hill, every time it rolls over a debt, it picks up more snow, gets heavier, and moves faster. By the time you reach the massive debts at the bottom of your list, like a $30,000 car loan or a $50,000 student loan, you have an absolute avalanche of freed-up cash flow to hurl at it every single month.
But let's pause right here because we really have to have the debate. This is where the pushback from the financial world is the absolute loudest. People hear this and their brains just short-circuit.
Oh, I know.
The system specifically addresses what it calls the certified nerds. These are the spreadsheet people who look at a $500 medical bill that has 0% interest and a $2,000 credit card that is bleeding them dry at 24% interest, and they scream at the deep dive. Paying the medical bill first is mathematically stupid. Yeah. You are literally losing money on the interest.
And the analysis here goes right back to the foundational premise of the entire philosophy we established in Lesson 1. The response to those spreadsheet nerds is incredibly blunt. If you were so fabulous with math, you wouldn't have crippling credit card debt to begin with. So put the calculator down and try it this way.
That is so harsh.
It sounds harsh, but it highlights the core truth that personal finance is about behavior modification, not mathematical optimization. Yes, the math does matter in a vacuum, but in the muddy trenches of getting out of debt, psychological motivation is vastly, overwhelmingly more important than saving $50 in interest.
Why? Because paying off massive debt takes a very long time. The average timeline to clear a typical debt load using this method is 18 to 24 months of grueling, gazelle-intense, no vacation, no restaurant sacrifice.
Precisely. And human beings are not Excel spreadsheets. We run on emotion. The psychology of quick wins is the absolute only thing that sustains that burning intensity over 2 years. Think about it like weight loss.
Okay.
If you go on a strict diet and you don't see a single pound drop on the scale for 6 weeks because you're focusing on a scientifically complex, mathematically optimal fat-burning zone, you will get frustrated and quit. You will go eat a pizza.
Definitely.
But if you starve yourself a little and lose 5 pounds in the very first week, your brain lights up. You are fired up. You stay on the diet.
So it's the exact same with debt.
It is the same with debt. If you attack the massive $20,000 credit card first, Just because it has the highest interest rate, you might go 6 or 8 months of working extra jobs without feeling any real, tangible progress. The balance barely moves. You will lose hope and quit. But if you wipe out a $52 medical bill on Tuesday and a $122 cell phone balance next Friday, your brain gets a massive hit of dopamine. You see the system actually working. You feel a sense of power you haven't felt in years.
There's this amazing validating story shared about a woman with a PhD, highly educated, highly intelligent, definitely understood math, but she took her debt snowball form, drove to a copy shop, supersized it into a giant poster-sized chart, and stuck it right on the front of her refrigerator.
I love that story.
Every single time she paid off a tiny debt, she took a massive red marker, drew a huge line through it, and literally yelled out loud in her empty kitchen, "Oh yeah, we're getting out of debt." Even with a PhD in a complex field, she fundamentally understood that she needed that psychological fire, that physical, visual victory to keep her motivation alive.
There was another great example of Josh and Amy Hopkins, a young couple who woke up and found themselves with over $169,000 in consumer debt before they even turned 25 years old.
That is staggering.
Josh was financing luxury BMWs and putting surprise trips to New York on credit cards. For them, utilizing the debt snowball wasn't about finding the mathematically optimal path. It was about learning the excruciatingly hard lesson of delaying pleasure. It took them 35 months of intense, grinding sacrifice. But the psychological momentum of crossing those smaller debts off the list month after month is what allowed them to rewire their brains and change their behavior permanently. Okay, so you were doing it. You were delivering the pizzas, you were rolling this snowball, crossing things off, the dopamine is hitting, you feel great. But what happens when you are halfway through the list, you have $10,000 left to go, and suddenly your car transmission completely blows up on the highway, or your kid needs an emergency root canal? If you've actually done the plastectomy and cut up all your credit cards like you were told, how on earth do you survive that crisis without going right back to the bank and taking out new debt? That is the exact inevitable vulnerability that this strategy anticipates, and it is precisely why the steps must be followed in a very rigid, specific order. You don't just blindly start paying off debt. Which brings us to lesson 7. Emergency funds are Murphy repellent.
Right. Before you even start the debt snowball, which is classified as baby step 2, the framework says you absolutely must complete baby step 1. Saving $1,000 in cash as fast as humanly possible, walk before you run. Then, way later down the road, only after the consumer debt is completely 100% gone do you move to baby step 3, which is finishing the emergency fund to cover a full 3 to 6 months of living expenses.
The underlying philosophy here relies heavily on the universal truth of Murphy's Law. You know, the old cynical adage that if something can go wrong, it absolutely will go wrong, usually at the worst possible time. Yep. The emergency fund is literally described as Murphy repellent. It is a proven fact that emergencies will happen. The strategy explains exactly why that initial $1,000 starter fund has to be established before you attack the debt snowball. If you do not have a cash buffer sitting between you and life, the very first flat tire, the first broken alternator, or the first unexpected trip to the urgent care will violently force you to reach for a credit card.
And what happens to your psychology if you do that? It completely shatters your momentum. It makes you feel like an absolute failure. It's exactly like being on a strict diet for a month, losing 2 pounds, and then having a bad day and eating an entire 7-pound bucket of ice cream. Yeah. You feel physically sick, you feel defeated, and you just want to quit the whole program because it feels useless. That $1,000 in cash catches those annoying little Murphys before they can metastasize into brand new debt.
There is a fantastic fitness analogy used here to explain the function of baby step 1. Scraping together that initial $1,000 is exactly like drinking a light protein shake to fortify your body just before you attempt a grueling, heavy lifting workout.
With the workout being the debt snowball.
Exactly. It doesn't make you a bodybuilder, but it gives you just enough baseline caloric strength to survive the exertion without passing out.
But I hear people screaming about this all the time. Why only $1,000? Have you seen the price of groceries? In today's economy, $1,000 doesn't cover a single month of rent, let alone a major medical emergency or a job loss.
And that is a mathematically true observation, which the system readily acknowledges. But the size is intentional. It is supposed to be uncomfortably, terrifyingly small.
Wait, really? It's supposed to be scary.
Yes. If you paused your debt payoff to build up a fully funded, massive 6-month emergency fund first, you would feel secure. You wouldn't feel the burning panic required to maintain gazelle intensity. You would get too comfortable living with your debt. The $1,000 is literally just enough to keep the car running so you can get to work and the lights on in the kitchen while you throw every other available penny at the debt mountain. It keeps you on edge.
It's like the starter emergency fund isn't an investment. You aren't trying to earn yield on it. It is strictly financial insurance. It is a tiny moat around your castle. It won't stop a fully armed invading army like a 6-month job loss, but it keeps the stray dogs and the minor annoyances out while you are inside frantically trying to rebuild the stone walls.
That is a very solid way to visualize it. And the plan clarifies that once the walls are rebuilt, once you hit baby step 3 and you are debt-free, the fully funded emergency fund of 3 to 6 months is calculated based purely on your expenses, not your income.
Okay, so it's not replacing your entire salary.
No, it is not meant to seamlessly replace your entire bloated paycheck. It is mathematically calculated to literally just keep food on the table, keep the power grid on, and pay the basic mortgage during a severe, catastrophic crisis. But crucially, there is a firm rule established here. Savings without emission is garbage.
Savings without emission is garbage. I like that.
This money isn't just lying around to be raided for a vacation. Its specific, heavily guarded mission is to protect you from ever going back into the snare of debt.
So your castle walls are finally rebuilt. You have absolutely no consumer debt. You have a fully funded emergency moat of 3 to 6 months of expenses sitting in a high-yield savings account. The biggest threat to that castle, the biggest logjam in the river of your wealth, isn't usually the daily lattes or the avocado toast that financial commentators constantly joke about.
No, it's not the coffee.
The real wealth destroyer, the anchor dragging you down, is usually parked right out in your driveway. Let's dig into lesson 8. New cars are throwing money out the window.
The framework essentially goes to total war against the American auto industry and the deeply ingrained cultural myth that permanent car payments are simply a necessary, unavoidable fact of modern adult life. It exposes the predatory concept of car fleecing.
Car fleecing.
Yeah, this is how car dealers are psychologically trained to operate. When you walk onto a lot, they immediately focus your attention entirely on how much down and how much a month instead of the actual total purchase cost of the vehicle.
Because they can hide the real price.
Exactly. If a skilled dealer can stretch a car loan term out from a reasonable 48 months to an absurd 72 or even 84 months, they can mathematically manipulate the monthly payment to look affordable to your monthly budget while utterly fleecing you on the total inflated sticker price and the compound interest.
But the core, undeniable argument against buying new cars isn't just about the predatory nature of the loan, it's about the brutal mathematics of depreciation. We have to look at the numbers. It points out that a brand new average-priced car loses roughly $30,000 in pure value over its first 4 or 5 years of life.
And this is where we have to really deconstruct the common rationalizations people use to defend their car purchases. Let's look at the famous 0% interest myth. A lot of guys will justify buying a $60,000 brand new truck by loudly declaring, "But I got 0% financing. I'm a genius. I'm using the bank's money for free."
Right. They think they beat the system.
The mathematical reality check here is devastating. Even if the money you borrowed cost you absolutely nothing in interest, the staggering guaranteed loss of value, that $30,000 in rapid depreciation, means you are effectively rolling down the window of that new truck and violently throwing $100 bills out onto the highway every single week you drive it. You are still taking a massive, wealth-destroying financial loss.
And then there is the absolute classic defense mechanism. But I need a warranty. I don't want to pay for unexpected repairs. I need the peace of mind.
It calls this defense mathematically absurd. Think about what you are actually doing. You are willingly, intentionally spending $30,000 in guaranteed, unstoppable depreciation just to avoid the possibility of maybe having a few $1,000s in mechanical repairs.
It makes no sense when you say it out loud.
None at all. As it states, you could literally take a used car into a shop and completely rebuild the engine and the transmission multiple times over for $30,000. It is an emotional argument entirely disguised as a logical financial one.
To combat this sickness, there is a brutal, uncompromising rule of thumb provided. If you cannot be completely 100% debt-free on an item with a motor, meaning a car, a boat, a motorcycle, an ATV, within 18 to 20 months, you must sell it immediately. It is a heavy iron weight wrapped around your ankles, preventing you from ever running the wealth-building race.
This ties directly back to our earlier discussion about the financial fake. The philosophy forces you to choose between looking good and being good. Looking good is having your completely broke friends admire the brand new leased BMW sitting in your driveway while you quietly sweat about the payments.
Yeah.
Being good is driving an older, reliable, slightly uncool used Honda that is paid for in cash, but possessing a massive, rapidly growing, multi-million-dollar net worth. You have to look in the mirror and decide which one of those realities you actually want.
Okay, but surely safety is a legitimate issue, right?
Yeah.
People push back on this constantly, and they bring their kids into it. They say, I have a newborn baby. I want a reliable, crash-tested, safe car for my family. I'm not going to break down on the side of a dark highway in a dangerous beater just to save some money.
And that is a fair concern, which is clarified carefully. The goal of this entire makeover isn't to force you to drive an unsafe, rusting, smoke-belching beater for the rest of your natural life. The $2,000 beater is strictly for the temporary, gazelle-intense phase while you are desperately cleaning up your past messes. The ultimate long-term goal is to drive a very nice, late-model, incredibly safe, high-quality used car, but to walk into the dealership and pay for it entirely with a cashier's check.
Exactly. So let's look at the big picture. Giving up the new car, delivering pizzas at midnight, living on a strict zero-based budget where every penny is tracked, cutting up your credit cards and fighting with your friends about it. Honestly, it sounds like a deeply miserable, restrictive, joyless life.
It sounds awful.
Why on earth would anyone willingly subject themselves to this level of pain and alienation? What is the actual payoff at the end of the tunnel? That brings us to lesson 9. Sacrifice now for freedom later.
This lesson introduces the central defining mantra of the entire methodology. Live like no one else, so later you can live like no one else. The sacrifice you endure is not permanent. It is not a vow of eternal poverty. It is a very specific, highly focused season of your life designed to violently break the generational cycle of debt.
And the transition from baby step 2, paying off the consumer debt, and baby step 3, building the emergency fund, into baby step 4, which is investing a full 15% of your gross household income for retirement, marks a massive fundamental psychological shift in the program.
It does, and it can be a difficult shift for people. You have to change gears from the panicked gazelle intensity to a sustained marathon-style muscle maintenance. You biologically and psychologically cannot run at a full, terrified sprint forever without burning out your adrenal glands and your marriage.
You'd collapse.
You would.
Huh.
Once the emergencies are fully covered with cash and the debt is completely gone, you drop the panic, but you absolutely must maintain the disciplined, intentional budgeting.
The ultimate shining goal of this investing phase is what is beautifully termed the pinnacle point. I absolutely love this concept. The pinnacle point is the exact mathematical moment in time when your invested money actually makes more money in a year than you do at your physical job.
The math for this is provided clearly. When you can comfortably live your life on just 8% of your total investment nest egg, you have achieved true financial security. At that exact point, your wealth takes on a living, breathing life of its own. It is working for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It doesn't get sick, it doesn't complain, and it doesn't take vacations. It just grows.
But how do you actually get returns that make that math possible? The strategy dives into the stock market, specifically looking at mutual funds and the S&P 500 data. It has to address the deep, paralyzing fear people have of market crashes destroying their wealth.
The data points out that despite wild, terrifying, headline-grabbing fluctuations, like the extreme volatility between 2020 and 2022, where the market might be up 28% one year and crash down 18% the next, the actual historical average of the S&P 500 over a 90-plus year timeline is around 11.59%.
That's a solid average.
It is. The foundational lesson is that true, wealthy, long-term investors do not panic over year-to-year drops. They do not watch the daily ticker. They rely on the long-term, decades-long history of the market. Long-term, boring consistency always mathematically beats trying to cleverly time the market or jumping in and out of funds out of sheer panic.
There is a beautiful grounding story used to illustrate this. It's about a man who was raised incredibly poor by his grandmother. He literally picked cotton as a child in the fields. He eventually got a blue-collar job working for a gas pipeline company, and he stayed at that exact same job for 35 years. He never, ever made more than $60,000 in a single year of his life. But he systematically, consistently invested 10% of every single paycheck into his company's stock purchase plan. He told himself he simply couldn't afford not to invest. And despite his low income, he retired an incredibly wealthy millionaire.
It is the ultimate real-world tortoise and the hare analogy. The hare is the guy frantically looking for the get-rich-quick scheme, the lottery ticket, the hot crypto tip, the heavily leveraged real estate flip. The tortoise is systematic, consistent, incredibly boring investing over several decades.
And the tortoise wins.
Every time. Because of the unstoppable mathematical power of compound interest, the tortoise ultimately explodes into massive wealth, while the hare usually ends up bankrupt.
It's the difference between sprinting to escape a burning building, which is the debt snowball phase, and waking up early every day to train for a marathon. You drop the immediate panic of the fire, but you keep the iron discipline of the training schedule. But this leads us to the ultimate philosophical question of the entire deep dive. Once you finally reach that pinnacle point, once you are completely out of debt, your emergency fund is flush, you're consistently investing 15%, your house is paid off, and you are officially, undeniably wealthy.
What is it all actually for? Is the goal just to hoard it like a dragon sitting on a pile of gold coins in a cave?
And that leads us to our final, culminating principle, Lesson 10. Wealth is forgiving. The philosophy makes it crystal clear that the ultimate goal of the total money makeover is absolutely not just to die with the largest bank account possible so you can win a spreadsheet competition. It identifies only 3 good, valid uses for money: fund, invest, and give. And it emphasizes above all else that giving is the biggest reward, the ultimate transcendent peak of the entire financial journey.
The analysis of this section is deeply, inextricably rooted in a specific philosophical and spiritual stance. It actively, aggressively pushes back against the pervasive cultural narrative that wealth is inherently corrupting, dirty, or evil. The argument is profound. If good, moral, kind people view money as an evil thing and actively avoid acquiring it, then by default, only bad, greedy, corrupt people will possess all the money and power in the world.
Right. If all the good people refuse to have money, we're in trouble.
Exactly. Therefore, good people actually have a moral duty to build wealth so they can take that power and do profoundly good things with it.
I found the concept of wealth acting as an amplifier to be so incredibly profound. It states that wealth simply makes you more of what you already fundamentally are. Let that sink in for a second. If you are a selfish, arrogant jerk while you're broke, becoming a millionaire will just make you a colossal king of the jerks with a bigger megaphone.
Yeah.
But if you are a generous, kind, empathetic person while you are struggling and broke, acquiring wealth will amplify that kindness on a massive, world-changing scale.
There is a quote from former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher utilized here to drive this exact point home with incredible pragmatism. No one would remember the Good Samaritan if he'd only had good intentions. He had money as well.
Oh, that is powerful.
It is a brutally pragmatic view of charity. Good intentions, thoughts, and prayers are wonderful, but actual money gives tangible physical power to those good intentions. It is what allows you to actually pay the innkeeper to medically care for the injured man on the side of the road.
So what does this all mean for the balance of our lives? Is the philosophy saying we shouldn't enjoy our hard-earned money at all? That we have to give every single extra dime away and live like impoverished monks in a monastery?
Not at all.
Yeah.
It explicitly, joyfully says you should have FUN.
Yeah.
You are absolutely supposed to enjoy the fruits of your grueling labor, buy the insanely nice car, just pay cash for it, go on the amazing first-class vacation to Europe, upgrade your lifestyle. But there is a strict warning about maintaining balance.
Okay, what's the warning?
If you only ever have fun and never invest, you will eventually go broke and become a burden to your children. If you only ever buy luxury things for yourself, you will inevitably experience a sickness called affluenza. You will tire of your expensive golf clubs, and as it vividly, memorably puts it, eating lobster every day eventually tastes like soap. It loses its joy.
Lobster tasting like soap. What a visual.
Yeah, and if you never ever give, you become like a monkey with his hand in a bottle, trapped by your own tight-fisted greed. Giving is the only singular use of money that provides lasting, deep, soul-level fulfillment.
I want to challenge you, the listener, right now, to really consider what wealth would amplify in your own life today. If wealth truly just makes you more of what you already are, who is the person you are becoming right now while you are broke or struggling? Are you generous with your limited time? Are you kind to the people around you? Are you disciplined? The total money makeover isn't just about fixing the math in your bank account to avoid that affluenza. It's about using the agonizing process of getting out of debt to forge the iron character required to actually handle freedom when it finally arrives. That guy or gal in the mirror isn't just the root cause of all your problems. They are the absolute only solution you have. Thank you for watching it. Please like, share, subscribe, follow up in the next video.